So today is the disappearance day. Start this. It's October 27th, 2020 in Hillsborough, and this is the disappearance day. It happened different years, but all on the same day, of Krishnadas Kaviraj, Raghunath Das Goswami, and Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. And those of you who've been to Radhakund Shamakund, so right near the Sangram, right near where the kunds come together, when you go up above the Sangram, and it's on the Shamakund side, right near what's called Manasapavanagat. There's the Pushpa Samadhis of these three personalities. It's called Teen Goswami Mandir, and teen means three, so it doesn't mean like teenagers. But there's Pushpa Samadhis of Krishnadas Kaviraj and Raghunath Das Goswami and Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. So today is their disappearance day. So we'll sing Ye Anilo. Premadana. Ye Anilo Premadana Koruna Prachur Hey no Prabhu Kotagela Acharya Thakur Kamora Swarup Rupa Kaha Sanatan Kahadasa Raghunatha Patita Pavan. It's on the very last page. Very, very last page. Kamora Bhatta Yuga Kaha Kaviraj Eka Kale Kotagela Goranataraj Pasane Kutibo Mata Anale Pasibo Goranga Gunera Nidhi Kotagele Pabo Se Saba Sangira Sange Ye Koilo Bilas Se Sangana Paya Kande Narotamo Das So the translation to Saparsada Gora Viraha Vilapa by Narottam Das Thakur. He who brought the treasure of divine love and who was filled with compassion and mercy, where has such a personality as Srinivasacharya gone? Where are my Swarup Damodar and Rupa Goswami? Where is Sanatana? Where is Raghunath Das, the favor of the fallen? Where are my Raghunath Bhatta and Gopal Bhatta? And where is Krishnadas Kaviraj? Where did Lord Gauranga, the great dancer, suddenly go? I will smash my head against a rock and enter into the fire. Where will I find Lord Gauranga, the reservoir of all wonderful qualities? Being unable to obtain the association of Lord Gauranga, accompanied by all of these devotees, in whose association he performed his pastimes, Narottama Das simply weeps. So I thought first we'd talk a little bit about Krishna Das Kaviraj, then Raghunath Das Goswami, and then Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. So Krishna Das Kaviraj tells a little bit about himself in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that he wrote, and how in his old age there was a program at his house, a Sankirtan program in his house, and the Brahmana priest was worshipping the deity. And during this time, a devotee of Lord Nityananda, Miniketana Ramdas, was there. And he was full of ecstatic love. But the Brahmana priest didn't respect Miniketana Ramdas because he didn't respect Lord Nityananda. And this is a very important point, that devotees represent the Lord. And when devotees are disrespected, the Lord is disrespected. Just like if you're speeding and a police officer pulls you over, if you disrespect the police officer, you're disrespecting the whole government, right? Isn't that it, right? It's not that that particular person who's a police officer is necessarily somebody special, but because they're representing the government. Or you go to enter into a country and you have the immigration officer. So one of my devotee friends works as an immigration officer. And, if you're disrespectful to her, you're disrespectful to the whole government. It's taken like that. If you're rude to the people at security, if you're rude to the people at immigration, they'll arrest you. If you're rude to just one of the other citizens, they're not necessarily going to arrest you. Does this make sense to everybody? Yeah? If you're waiting in line to go through security and you're just rude to somebody in the line, but if you're rude to the security officers. So when you disrespect the devotee, you disrespect their Lord. Of course, all the devotees are worshiping God, but God has many different forms. So to disrespect the devotee of Lord Nityananda was taken as a disrespect to Lord Nityananda. And Krishna Das Kaviraj then got into an argument with his brother. So his brother had respect for Lord Chaitanya, but not respect for Lord Nityananda. And so Krishna Das Kaviraj was arguing with his brother and saying, you can't only respect Lord Chaitanya, you have to also respect Lord Nityananda. And Lord Nityananda was so pleased with him that he was willing to go against his own brother for the sake of Nityananda, that he appeared to Krishna Das Kaviraj in a dream and told him to go to Vrindavan. At that time, Krishna Das Kaviraj was already in his 90s. And he writes about himself as being in ill health, that he was shaking, that he couldn't see so well. But anyway, he still took that instruction, and of course, in those days, there weren't trains and buses and planes. You had to walk or go in an animal vehicle. You really didn't. It wasn't an easy journey. But he went to Vrindavan, and there Krishna Das Kaviraj stayed on the bank of Shamakund. Stayed at Radhakund Shamakund. So you can go there today, and you can see the place where Krishna Das Kaviraj wrote the Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's almost right next to 1 minute walk from the Pushpa Samadhi, where they put Pushpa Samadhi means they take the flowers that were put on the body at the funeral and they bury those flowers. They would often have Pushpa Samadhis One reason is so you can have two samadhis in two different places. One is where the actual body is buried, or sometimes where the ashes are buried. And then the other is where the flower that was on the body at the funeral was buried. And this way the person can be respected in more than one place. Another reason was that the Muslims were often digging up bodies of Hindu saints, desecrating them. And so by having a pushpa samadhi, the Muslims didn't pay any attention to that. So that was there was another reason why they did that. But anyway, very close to there is the place where Krishnadas Kaviraj wrote the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So how did he write the Chaitanya Charitamrita? Because he himself did not witness the Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes. So he was basing the Chaitanya Charitamrita off of diaries. So for the Madhya Lila and the Ancha Lila, he was basing his writings on the diaries of Swarup Damodar. All right, so let's leave it there. Meanwhile, Raghunath Das Goswami, whose disappearance day is today, he was the only son of both his father and uncle. So between his father and uncle, there was just the one son. And his father and uncle were tax collectors. And in those days in India, what the tax collectors did, they would collect tax locally, and they would keep a percentage of those taxes as their own salary, and then they would turn over the rest to the local government. Then the local government would pay a portion to the state government, and then they would pay a portion to the federal government. Like the way we do it in America, you pay local taxes like property taxes, you pay state taxes, and you pay federal taxes. And the money goes right to the government, and then the government pays a salary to the people who work for them. So we have a very different system. But in those days, all taxes were collected locally, and then the local tax collector kept part of the money. And this, of course, depended on the honesty of the local tax collector to keep the proper percentage, to do the proper reporting and keep the proper percentage. And as you can imagine, this wasn't always done honestly. Right? Like today, even today, it's not that these things are always honest. Yes, we all know that. Everybody knows that. Because there's a lot of money collected in taxes. So there was some dispute over whether or not the taxes were collected honestly and whether or not the money was kept honestly. And the government came to imprison Raghunath Das's father and uncle. But knowing that the government was coming, they had run away. And so when the government officers came, the only person to arrest was Raghunath Das Goswami. So when he was arrested, he used diplomacy to deal with the government officers to get out of jail himself and also to get his father and uncle released. And Srila Prabhupada uses this particular incident as evidence that devotees are expert. Prabhupada talks about this in 1976 in Mumbai in regard to the Brahmachari ashram. As Prabhupada writes in the second canto, the Brahmachari ashram is for training in values in life and also to get specific training for a livelihood, because the vast majority of people in the Brahmachari ashram go on to enter the Grahastha ashram and have to have some kind of livelihood. If they're not going to enter into the Grahastha ashram, then they have to be trained to become vanaprasthas and sannyasis, to take on some responsibility in Lord Chaitanya's mission. So Prabhupada said in the Brahmachari ashram, and he was going back and forth between talking about Gurukula for children and the Brahmachari ashram for adults. He was conflating these. He said that they should not become callous to things of the world. They should be expert. It's one of the 26 qualities of a devotee. He said the devotee should not think, oh, I'm just going to learn about Krishna consciousness and I'm not going to learn about anything in the world. He said, no, the devotee should know about the world something of everything and everything of something. Something of everything and everything of something. In addition to studying their Krishna consciousness. I would assume this would apply to the brahmacharinis as well. In other words, when one is a student, when one is going to school in the Gurukul, the brahmacharini ashram is considered to be a student life. So one should also be very expert in dealing with things in the world. Whether one is going to learn that expertise because one will marry and need a profession, or whether one will need that expertise because one will then take on some responsibility in Mahaprabhu's movement. Generally, one does not stay in the brahmachari ashram one's whole life. Then one is like a child one's whole life. One takes on some responsibility, and one must have some expertise. You know, if you don't know how to manage a bank account, if you don't know, how to drive a car, you know, if you don't know these kind of things, if you don't know how to type, you know, it will be very difficult, it will be very difficult to function in the world, yes? Right? Then one will always remain dependent. So one is supposed to be able, generally speaking, the Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, they all are independent. Even the higher level Shudras, you know, the little guy in Govardhan town who gets out his piece of cardboard and fixes shoes, usually flip-flops, you know, he's also independent, even though he's a Shudra. He has his own shop, which is a piece of cardboard, and he sets his own timings, and he sets his own prices, and he decides what shoes he's willing to fix and what shoes he's not willing to fix. So this expertise Prabhupada talks about with Raghunath Das Goswami. Now, Raghunath Das Goswami was being prepared by his father and his uncle to take over the family occupation, but he became attracted to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And sometimes what happens when a person becomes attracted to the Lord is they lose all interest in the activities of Varna and ashrams, and they simply dedicate themselves to bhakti. So, although there's that inclination, in most cases, it doesn't last for people. We've seen this in the Hare Krishna movement. People gave up everything in the world. They gave up their family, their education, their occupation, and they moved into an ashram and just did bhakti 24/7. And then after some time, then they wanted to do something. They wanted to have a family. They wanted to have a career. That, generally speaking, like probably way over 95%. So very few people could do what Raghunath Das Goswami did, where he gave up all of that. He gave up all of his duties in Varna and ashram and took to bhakti 24/7 for the rest of his life. That's a very unusual situation. So as his parents were preparing him for his career, he also got married. In those days, both men and women got married as teenagers. Like Mahaprabhu got married when he was 14. Bhaktivinoda, even 150 years ago, got married at 14. Gandhi got married at 13. So people were married young. They had their occupation very young. They were part of course, an extended family. You can't get married at 13 or 14 unless you're part of an extended family. So he had said that Raghunath Das Goswami had a beautiful wife, that she looked like a heavenly demigod. Fantastic wealth. His parents were very, very, very wealthy. But he wanted to go see Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He wanted to give up anything. And those of us who joined the Hare Krishna movement, especially when Srila Prabhupada was here in the 60s and 70s, we often did things like this. You know, Raghunath Das Goswami kept trying to run away from home and join Lord Chaitanya. And his parents, they kept capturing him and bringing him back. And this is also kind of interesting because in America in 2020, if you're a legal adult, so I don't know how old Raghunath Das Goswami was at that time, your parents can't capture you and bring you back. You know, that's illegal. But in those days, evidently, they could do that. And even at some point, they had guards all around the house, you know, so he wouldn't get away. Although at one point, there's this discussion where Raghunath Das Goswami's mother says to his father, you know, if all this money and this wife is not going to keep him at home, why do you think the guards are going to keep him at home? Now, we should note that Raghunath Das Goswami's father and uncle's mother, his family, were all Vaishnavas. They were all devotees. In fact, they regularly hosted programs with Haridas Thakur. And they were devotees of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It wasn't just they were generally devotees of Krishna, but they were what we call prakrita bhaktas. They were materialistic devotees. They were not at the level of full surrender. And we see this, like when I joined the Hare Krishna movement, my mother was very antagonistic for 8 years and then moderately antagonistic for another 2 years. My mother stopped being antagonistic when we owned our own house, and my husband got a job working for Ford Motor Company, and I ran a nursery school in the basement of our house. And she finally gave up her antagonism when one day we watched the news with her on television. Then she decided we were normal people. But before that, it was really hard for her. She would say to me, religion is all right, but you have to be so extreme. Do you have to? And it was socially embarrassing. Also. I mean, now that I'm a parent and a grandparent of adult grandchildren, I get this. I didn't get this when I was young. That if she said to her Jewish friends, oh yeah, so my daughter's married a Christian and they're part of a Hindu group and she's panhandling books in the New York subway. It was completely a social embarrassment. Especially my parents were very wealthy and aristocratic people, very, very famous all over the country. And for them to say this, it was just, especially I was living in a closet, my daughter's living in actually a closet. So, my daughter's living in a closet in a Hindu ashram and panhandler. So, it was the same kind of thing, that there's this social thing that even like among Catholic families, they don't generally want their children to become priests and monks and nuns. Among Indian families, they don't generally want their children to become sannyasis. It's a general thing. Okay, you can be religious, but don't dedicate your life. There's one devotee I know from Mumbai. His parents, very similar to my family, very aristocratic, very well known, in his case, very politically affiliated. And they told him, if you move in the brahmachari ashram, we will do everything in our power to ruin the movement in Mumbai. We'll use all our political clout and our money. And so his spiritual master, Radhanath Swami, said, you are not allowed to move in the brahmachari ashram. He said, you must get married. He said, for the sake of saving the whole movement here in Mumbai. I know him and his wife quite well, lovely people. So this is sometimes like that, because of social embarrassment. Yeah? So, and they were devotees. It wasn't that they weren't devotees. Raghunath Das Goswami, finally when he saw Lord Chaitanya said, look, stop acting like a crazy person. Pretend to be a materialist, and when the time is right, you'll be able to get away. But don't act crazy. So he did that, but from that time, he didn't go in the inner portion of the house anymore. And at one point, Lord Nityananda was in town. We see some connection between Lord Nityananda and Raghunath Das Goswami and Krishnadas Kaviraj here. So at one point, Lord Nityananda was in town, and Raghunath Das Goswami went to see him. And he offered obeisances, he offered dandavats from a distance, and Lord Nityananda said, come here, you thief. I guess in the pandemic we don't have water anymore. Is it possible to get water? So Raghunath Das Goswami went forward, and Lord Nityananda put his feet on his head. And then he said, okay, you're a big, rich materialist. Why don't you use this nicely and prepare a festival for all my devotees? So Raghunath Das Goswami prepared a festival of chip rice and condensed milk and chip rice and yogurt. Thank you so much. And there was, and some other preparations as well, like bananas. And there were so many people eating, there wasn't even enough room. And some of them were having to sit in the Ganga. The child doesn't disturb me, by the way, don't worry about it. That some of them were having to sit in the Ganga with their pots of chipped rice. Anyway, after that, Raghunath Das Goswami got an opportunity when his spiritual master came to him in the evening and said, one of my pujaris has left his service. Would you please come and counsel him? This is an interesting story. And Raghunath Das Goswami said, sure, I'll take care of it. You go home. But he didn't. He actually lied to his guru. He said, I'll take care of it. You go home. And instead of going to counsel the pujari, he left and went to Jagannath Puri to surrender to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Please don't try this at home. Actually, a person like Raghunath Das Goswami, we don't imitate his behavior. Please don't do that in general. So he went to Jagannath Puri, and there he got put under the care of Swarup Damodar. He went to see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He went through the back roads so his father's guards couldn't find him. And the guards ended up meeting Shivananda Sain in the party, who went to Jagannath Puri every year for Rath Yatra. And they said, no, he's not with us. We don't know where he is. So the guards went back to the family. And then later on, they got news that Raghunath Das Goswami had indeed made it to Jagannath Puri. So Mahaprabhu put Raghunath Das Goswami under the care of Swarup Damodar. He was known as the Raghunath of Swarup. Now, for a couple years, Raghunath Das Goswami's family was sending him money in Jagannath Puri. And Raghunath Das Goswami would use this to feed Lord Chaitanya. And after a couple years, he would invite him once a month for prasad. And after a couple years, he declined the money. And for many years, I wondered about this. Why would he decline the money? And then I had a certain experience in a certain ISKCON temple with a certain rich devotee. And I realized that when you take a lot of money from people, you can become beholden to them. And they can use the fact that they're giving money, especially if they're giving a lot of money regularly, to try to deviate you. So Raghunath Das Goswami felt that he didn't want to be in that situation. What I prefer for a lot of the projects I run is getting lots of small donations from a lot of people. I mean, you do have instances where people give big donations and aren't manipulative. So, there are some people who are like that. I have a wonderful experience with a couple devotees, who do give a lot of money, and they're not like that. They don't try to move, everything. But we've had in some ISKCON temples where all of a sudden we're worshiping demigods, because people who are giving a lot of money are pushing in that direction. So then Raghunath Das Goswami, he also gradually increased his own austerity with eating. Whether he was eating from the charity booths or whether he was just standing and begging. And after a while, he took the old discarded prasadam. He took the rotten rice that even the cows wouldn't eat, and he washed off the rotten parts, and ate the hard inner portion with salt. And Mahaprabhu came and ate some of this. Yeah? As Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave Raghunath Das Goswami his own Govardhan Shila. We have this painting on the cover of our Manashiksha book, and a necklace of gunja berries. And Raghunath Das Goswami worshipped this Govardhan Shila under the direction of Swarup Damodar. After Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu disappeared from the planet, Raghunath Das Goswami went to Radhakund and Shamakund. There he was staying without any kind of structure. And one time Sanatana Goswami, coming to see him, saw that there were tigers drinking water near Raghunath Das Goswami, and that Krishna was protecting Raghunath Das Goswami from the tigers. And he said, look, you can't take service from Krishna. Build yourself a hut. But Raghunath Das Goswami didn't do that. Then another time Sanatana Goswami comes, it's really blazing hot. And Srimati Radharani herself is sheltering Raghunath Das Goswami while she's perspiring. And Sanatana Goswami then said to him, look, taking service from Krishna is bad enough, but not Srimati Radharani. Build a hut. So Raghunath Das Goswami did indeed build a hut. He built a bhajan kutir right next to Krishnadas Kaviraj. Aha, now the threads have come together, and both of their bhajan kutirs are there at Manasapavana Ghat. This is the place at Shamakund where Srimati Radharani bathes at noon every day. And she says anyone who bathes there will get love for the Lord like she has. And it's right around the corner from the Teen Goswami Mandir, the Samadhi place, which is what we're talking about today. So there's a courtyard there. And every afternoon, Raghunath Das Goswami would meet with Krishnadas Kaviraj. And Raghunath Das Goswami gave Krishnadas Kaviraj the diaries of Swarup Damodar about the Madhya-lila and Ancha-lila, the middle and late pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, where Raghunath Das Goswami was also a personal witness. So every afternoon for 3 or 4 hours, they would discuss the pastimes of Mahaprabhu, which Krishnadas Kaviraj did not personally see. But Raghunath Das Goswami did. He had the diaries of his Shiksha Guru, Swarup Damodar, and that's how the Chaitanya Charitamrita was written. Of course, Raghunath Das Goswami himself wrote many books, one of them which we've produced, Srimana Shiksha. He's written many books of pastimes of the Lord, and he's one of the Manjari Gopis in Srimati Radharani's group. All right, so now we want to turn to, we should also say he lived very, very austerely. He hardly slept, sleeping like 1.5, 2 hours a day, and he would just take a little buttermilk every day. One time, he was meditating on offering sweet rice to Radha and Krishna, and in his meditation, he ate the sweet rice prasadam, but he overate in meditation, and he got a stomach ache. And he told the devotee, sorry, I can't come today for the program. And the doctor came and said, you got a stomach ache. Looks like you got a stomach ache from eating too much milk and rice. And everybody said, but nobody gave him milk and rice to eat. So he got a stomach ache from overeating in his meditation. So if you can get a stomach ache from overeating in your meditation, then you can also imitate Raghunath Das Goswami. He also used to offer Dandavat parikramas around Radhakund and Shamakund. One time when Prabhupada was asked about bathing in Radhakund, he said, if you want to bathe in Radhakund, then you also have to be able to offer Dandavat parikrama of Radhakund. He would offer Dandavats to the devotees. Of course, he was chanting a lot and writing books and so forth. So he was fully engaged like that. Also, Raghunath Das Goswami was the leader of the renovation of Radhakund and Shamakund. Now, he didn't do the management. The management was done by Jiva Goswami, but he was the visionary. And at one point, a very rich gentleman wanted to give some money to Krishna consciousness, and he had a dream that he should offer that money to Raghunath Das Goswami. And he went there and he told Raghunath Das Goswami, I had this dream, I should give you this money. And so this money was engaged for the excavation of Radhakund and Shamakund. And we could talk about Raghunath Das Goswami for a few days. So we're going to want to go on to Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. Raghunath Bhatta Goswami was the son of Tapan Mishra. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he visited Varanasi on his way back from Vrindavan, he stayed at the house of Tapan Mishra. At that time, Raghunath was a boy. He was a young child. So Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, once he grew up, he decided to visit Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Jagannath Puri. He stayed there for 8 months, and he was engaged in serving Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He was a very expert cook, and he would cook for the Lord. And I can't remember if it was the time's short, so I'm not going to look it up. It's in Ancha 13, if you want to look it up. So Raghunath Das Goswami, and it's in Ancha 13, starting at text 89. Okay, it was the first strip. So Raghunath Das Goswami, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, when he went to Jagannath Puri from Varanasi, he had a servant with him carrying his bags. On the way, though, he met a gentleman called Ramdas Vilas. Ramdas Vilas was known as a great devotee, as a great Vaishnava. He had a reputation Krishnadas Kaviraj says, as a Padama Vaishnava. He was always chanting the holy name of Lord Ramachandra. And he told Raghunath Bhatta Goswami that he would carry his luggage. So Ramdas Vilas was carrying the luggage of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami and chanting the holy name of Ram constantly. He was a great scholar of poetry, and he was known, he had a reputation of being a Parama Vaishnava. But his desire was to merge with the Lord. He did not have a mood of service. Okay, so he's chanting all day. He's a student of Sanskrit poetry. He's serving Raghunath Bhatta Goswami by carrying his suitcases most of the way from Varanasi to Jagannath Puri. They get to Jagannath Puri, and they see Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who immediately recognizes Raghunath Bhatta, although the last time he saw him, he was just a little child. He was kind of surprised. Raghunath Bhatta, oh, you recognize me. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave him his association for 8 months while Raghunath Bhatta would cook for him regularly. Mahaprabhu really appreciated his cooking. But Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave no attention to this Ramdas Vilas at all. Nothing. Why? Because Ramdas Vilas, that wasn't what he wanted. Ye tamam prapadyante tam sataiva bhajamyaham. Krishna reciprocates. If you're so-called worshiping the Lord and the devotees, but you don't really want service, you want merging, the Lord's not going to give you service. He's going to give you merging. So Lord Chaitanya didn't pay any attention to him. Interesting, isn't it? Now, Ramdas Vilas became a teacher of Sanskrit poetry to the family above and under Roy. Another interesting fact. Anyway, so at the end of 8 months, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said to Raghunath Bhatta, I want you to go back to Varanasi and serve your old parents, but do not marry. And Prabhupada has a super heavy purport. Any of you who want to never marry, read that purport. Any of you who are married, please don't read it. You'll become very discouraged. But if you are married and you read it, keep in mind that Srila Prabhupada himself got married. So, anyway, Hare Krishna. But Lord Chaitanya gives this instruction, do not marry, go home and serve your old parents, because his parents were great devotees. So with Raghunath Das Goswami, Mahaprabhu accepted that he left his parents. With Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, he said, go home and serve your parents. You know, one has to be careful about taking some instruction out of context. So Raghunath Bhatta Goswami went back to Varanasi. He served his parents for the next 4 or 5 years until they departed the world. Then again he went back to Jagannath Puri, and again he stayed with Mahaprabhu for 8 months. Oh, also, when Mahaprabhu told him, he said, don't marry, serve your parents, and study the Bhagavatam from a great devotee. Forgot that very important instruction. Don't marry, serve your parents, study Bhagavatam from a realized devotee. So he did that. Then he came back to Jagannath Puri after like 4 or 5 years. Again was with Mahaprabhu. After another 8 months, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, now I want you to go to Vrindavan. Be there under the care of Rupa and Sanatan. Study the Bhagavatam constantly and chant the holy name of the Lord. So Raghunath Bhatta Goswami went to Vrindavan, and particularly he recited the Bhagavatam to Rupa Goswami. So he would read Bhagavatam to Rupa Goswami every day, and he would recite each verse with 3 different tunes. Actually, I'm just going to try to remember. So one of the interesting things about Raghunath Bhatta Goswami is that he never, ever criticized a Vaishnava. And Prabhupada says in that purport, he had disciples. He said that generally teachers have to say something critical. I mean, Srila Prabhupada would criticize even, Mayavadis and materialistic scientists. Bhaktivinoda talks about this. If you're a teacher, you have to praise and criticize. But Raghunath Bhatta Goswami didn't. He simply never criticized anybody. And he would never hear any criticism of anybody. His mood was everybody is serving Krishna. Now, a person with this mood cannot be a manager. It's impossible. You can't say, oh yes, everyone's a devotee. We'll just let criminals come on the property because they're also devotees. And it doesn't matter if you put the pipes in so the water is spurting all over everything and the walls are falling apart. Everything's fine. That's not possible. Just like Arjuna had to fight on the battlefield. That was his job. Krishna said, don't be forgiving to Bhishma and Drona. Kill them. When we have some service to do in the world for Krishna, then we don't want to be under the modes. We don't want to have the mode of passion pushing us. We don't want to have the mode of ignorance pushing us. Honestly, we don't even want the mode of goodness pushing us. That's just another kind of, that's an I am such a wonderful, balanced person in harmony with the universe. It's another kind of ego, sattva-gun. We don't want any of these kinds of egos pushing us. But we have to use the material energy, which means the modes of nature. And we don't want to lose our temper, but sometimes we may have to use it. Like Prabhupada said about Arjuna, fighting without anger is not possible. So the devotee may appear to have a particular varna and ashram in the world. And people like Raghunath Das Goswami, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, they gave up all conceptions of varna and ashram, frankly speaking. And we may appear to use these in the world, but we shouldn't have them our impetus for work should not be the modes. Our impetus for work should be bhakti. This is the whole lesson of the Bhagavad Gita. Fight, Arjuna, but fight in a different consciousness. And then if we turn to Bhagavad Gita 4:24, then everything becomes transcendental. If my reason for taking care of my husband, my wife, my children is because I'm a servant of Krishna, like Bhaktivinoda says, I see my home as a temple. I see my family members as members of the ashram of the temple. I'm the temple president. I'm the temple commander. I don't see them as my family members. If we think this is my family, therefore I should take care of them. I was really thinking about that yesterday and today because there's fires in California that are right around the home of my son. They've had to evacuate. And, I'm thinking, okay, I really want to pray for the welfare of my son right now they're safe. They're in San Diego right now at a hotel. But, Krishna, please don't have my son's house burned down. And then I thought, Amila, there's been fires all over the country. Have you prayed for everybody? Did you pray for all the people in Northern California? Did you pray for all the people in Oregon? Did you pray for all the people in Colorado? You're just going to pray for the people in Irvine? So this is the tendency, right? Swajana, my people. Or I'm going to be, I'm going to do this because I'm a banker, I'm a fighter, I'm a this, I'm a scholar, I'm a plumber, and therefore I'm going to do it. But no, it should be I'm a devotee. I'm a devotee of Krishna, and I have some responsibility for these people in my family. I have a responsibility to my mother. I have responsibility to my children. I have responsibility like that. Or I have responsibility for a job in Krishna's service, and what's motivating me is love. What's motivating me is pleasing Krishna, not what's motivating me is the modes of nature. So it certainly would be very nice to have a service where one had no need ever to criticize anyone. Of course, we should come to the point where we have no inner pushing in the heart to criticize anyone. And Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, whenever he'd recite the Bhagavatam, I don't know quite how he did it, because he would have all these ecstatic symptoms while he's reciting the Bhagavatam. Like Gadadhar Pandit, he would cry so much reading the Bhagavatam, you couldn't read his Bhagavatam anymore. In those days, books were written on leaves with ink, like real ink, not the kind you get today from a ballpoint pen, but ink so that you've got water on it, it made a mess. So, Gadadhar Pandit's reading the Bhagavatam with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he's crying, and you couldn't even read it anymore. So Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, he's, crying and shivering and dancing. I don't know, how do you read the Bhagavatam like that? But he did, and he would sing each verse in 3 different tunes. I was thinking about the devotees who've taken the verses and put them into different poetry, right? Like Kalakanta Prabhu has taken the whole Bhagavad Gita and written it in rap. My friend Rukmini loves that. In some places in our Varna book, we have Kalakanta's rap translations of a Bhagavad Gita verse. And you have Narayani, who also put every single Bhagavad Gita verse in poetry. I mean, she knows, imagine that, rewriting every verse of the Bhagavad Gita in poetry. So if you took every verse of the Bhagavatam and rewrote it in English poetry, right? I've done that with some verses from Shastra, rewritten them and rewritten the translation in English poetry. Imagine that. So chanting every verse with 3 different tunes, with ecstatic love. Wouldn't you like to go to that Bhagavatam reading? So Rupa Goswami went to that Bhagavatam reading every day. So today we can remember, we talked today about Krishnadas Kaviraj, Raghunath Das Goswami, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, these great acharyas. They set examples for us to be inspired for, not to imitate. Please don't imitate. Please don't try to sleep only 2 hours a day and live on 1 little cup of buttermilk. But they set examples for us of how to be fully devoted to Krishna. And of course, all of them, Krishnadas Kaviraj has left his books. Yes, like Chaitanya Charitamrita, one of the main books in our Krishna consciousness movement, Govinda Lilamrita. And Raghunath Das Goswami has left us so many books, which we can study and try to imbibe their mood of service. So thank you very much.